Hello, my dear Franken friends, and welcome to Spookyou, your one-stop shop for all things ghastly and ghoulish. I'm your host, Barnabas Vixen. How horrible of you to join us. Curl up, invite your friends, and by all means, make sure those lights are out. That way it's harder to tell what may or may not be lurking around you. There's nothing like a good mystery, am I right? Tonight will feature a singular tale of devilish design curated by those wicked weavers of woe. And without further ado, allow me to pass the reins on over to our vivacious voiceover virtuoso Trey Falco for tonight's sinister story. Please keep all limbs and side covers at all times. We wouldn't want anything to go missing now, would we?
Here are some more stories about places that I was stationed at and the ones I heard from other guards in the company. A lot of these other guards are dead now, and I reckon the same could happen to me at any moment on my shift, so in case there's a lack of updates, most likely something happened to me. So one memorable experience I've had, and not in a good way, was when I was stationed at a local park with another guard. The park wasn't too big. Had a playground, running track which wound in a circle around the park itself, and even a tennis courts. Everywhere else around were thick trees, so following the running track gave a very convincing impression of being in a forest, away from civilization. My coworker and I were about to start our shift in the park at 7 p.m. and would end it at 7 a.m. And there was a tiny guardhouse near the entrance which we would spend most of our shift in, and every 2 hours we would go patrolling around the park, very strictly following the running track where the path was illuminated. We were given a heavy-duty flashlight and a backup torch in case the main one runs out of power. And HQ issued an order that if we found any burnt-out light on our path, we were to retreat to the guardhouse immediately and let maintenance know about it in the morning. Under no circumstances were we to step into the dark patch of the track. So this one night I was doing my rounds around the park when all of a sudden I hear my partner's voice. He simply shouted, "Hey, help me!" from a distance. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, so I called out to him, moving my beam across the trees beyond the path. Now, the light we were given is able to penetrate darkness so well that you could see at least 100 meters in front of you. But when I illuminated the area my partner's voice was coming from, there was nothing. Moreover, the voice seemed to change the positions it was coming from. And he yelled again, "Hey, help me!" I called him once more, asking him to tell me where he was, but there was no response. I didn't dare wander into the darkness, especially with no signs of him anywhere, heavy-duty light or not. And then my partner yelled for help again, and I realized something which made the hairs at the back of my neck stand straight.
Sorry for the interruption, dear listener, but I just had to remind you. If you're enjoying this series, then make sure you head on over to Amazon and pre-order the book from this talented author, Tales of a Security Guard, set to release on January 30th. Seriously, take the time to pause this video and go give it a look-see. Without these authors, our vivacious voiceover virtuoso would be picking pennies out of the couch to feed his family instead of narrating these amazing stories. At least now he has a hobby. I mean, would you take that away from him? I didn't think so. Not only does it include the 12-part series that you're watching right now, but it also includes the Night Guard series that we've previously narrated on this channel, and more terrifying tales to fuel your insomnia-induced night readings. And while you're at it, make sure you head on over to their Facebook page, Scary Stories with BB, to keep up to date with everything that they're doing. And I'd also like to mention that this author is not our sponsor, nor have we been paid in any way to bring you this message. No, we here at Spookyou just want to remind you, our listeners, that the authors behind these wonderful stories need to eat too. And not only that, but they do deserve to be compensated for the work that they do. That about wraps it up for this break, so back to your story.
His cries for help were on a loop, always saying the same thing, same intonation, same length of pauses. I even looked at my watch and sure enough, I was right. Call for help, 8 seconds pause. Call for help. 8 seconds pause. And I then realized how suddenly quiet everything was. Usually the park was somewhat loud at night, crickets, owls, etc. But now it was so silent I could hear my own heart thumping. I turned around very slowly and walked out of there, doing my best not to sprint as my partner's looping cries for help persisted almost halfway until I was back at the guardhouse. When I finally got back, my suspicion was confirmed and my partner was there, visibly confused at what I'd just told him. We called HQ to report suspicious activity, and in no less than 5 minutes, a vehicle pulled up at the entrance. An intervention unit emerged, which was essentially an armored and heavily armed team sent in case of emergencies. I was questioned by the team leader for the next hour while the others went to the scene where I had heard the voice of my coworker. My partner and I were escorted out of the place, and the following morning we were told that the park contract was voided by the company and we no longer needed to go there. I don't really know anything else though, because right after that, I returned to my original post back at HQ. I spoke to a former intervention unit member who had worked for the company for over 5 years. He said that some of the shit he had seen was unimaginable and he was willing to share some with me. For instance, this one time they got a call from a residential building they were securing that there were strange noises coming from one of the rooms. The team arrived on the scene and questioned the guard who reported the incident. Apparently his job was to make sure no one entered room 416. He explained that the room itself was unoccupied, but that noises would be heard constantly between 2 and 3 a.m. And usually those noises would include childlike giggling, loud footsteps, bouncing of something on the floor, etc. And the residents learned to ignore the noises, but this one old lady, Mrs. Rogers, managed to get in, which he saw on the camera feed. Now, the intervention unit was told not to go in after 20 minutes had passed, but they still had time, so they rushed into the room. The guy who was telling me this said that as they approached the room, they heard voices like a group of people trying to talk in a hushed tone. He explained that it sounded like kids in school when they're trying to whisper, but were unintentionally loud enough for others to hear. As soon as they touched the doorknob, the voices stopped in unison. Not like the conversation was over, like literally as if someone pressed a mute button in the middle of a sentence. They burst inside the empty room, which looked like no one stepped inside for years, weapons raised. No one was there. As they're standing there completely silent, they hear a barely audible wheezing sound from above, and they all look up, and as they do, they freeze. The guy who told me this said that what he saw still keeps him up at night sometimes. Mrs. Rogers was standing on the ceiling like a spider on all fours, craning her neck so much they thought her neck was broken, and she was looking directly at the unit upside down and wide-eyed. Spit was occasionally dripping from her mouth to the floor as she was wheezing. Her fingers had somehow mutated into long claws, and then without any warning, Mrs. Rogers had managed to jump down on one of the team members in the blink of an eye, and gunshots ensued. He said that by the time they were done shooting, 2 more members were down, and Mrs. Rogers had hundreds of bullet holes in her body and head and was no longer moving. He encountered similar scenarios after that, but never came so close to dying again. The building residents were evacuated from the building indefinitely the next day, and the official story given was that there was a toxic fungi located within the building. The final story I'll share here is going to be the one I was told by another guard who went missing later on. He was stationed at a private school, and it had a set of very strict rules they had to follow. First off, there were 10 guards in total in each shift, and each of them were assigned to a classroom. Their job was to count all the students after the classes were over. Should any of the students go missing, they were to call HQ immediately. Now comes the weird part. One day, the guard who told me this story counts all the kids in the class, and the final number just doesn't add up. Instead of 32 students, he has 33. He counts a few times to make sure, and when the number is confirmed as 33, he tells the teacher to start calling on them by name and separating them from the group one by one. The teacher does so, calling each and every student, but when they're done, there are no surpluses. The list showed 32 and 32 were called on, and yet 33 students were in the classroom. They couldn't tell who the extra student was, even when the guard was watching them like a hawk to make sure none of them would sneak to the group of called-on kids while they weren't looking. Baffled and unsure what to do, the guy tells the teacher to keep an eye on them while he contacts HQ. Already feeling silly for contacting the higher-ups over an extra student rather than a missing one, he expected HQ to scold him for calling about something like that. But when he says he has an extra student who just popped up, chuckling at the absurdity of the situation, The person on the other end of the line suddenly goes silent. She asks him to repeat what he said, and when he does, the woman tells him to get the teacher out of there, lock the classroom immediately, and then radio everyone else to do the same at once. He does so, and only minutes later the intervention unit arrives, escorting the guards out of there. He said he has no idea what happened next, but when he returned to the school the next day for his shift, everything seemed to be normal. No one really knows what the company is dealing with here. Not even intervention was told what these encounters are, since it seems to be a very strict need-to-know basis. One thing's for sure, though. When I hear some of these stories from other guards, I realize just how lucky I got to run into some of these creatures and live to tell the tale.
Welcome back, my darling deviants. Well, tell me, did you enjoy that twisted tale? Of course you did. I knew you had that air about you, that hunger for the horrific and the macabre. So, did we spook you? If not, then file a complaint with our complaint department detailing all accounts of non-spookiness you found in this video, and we'll get back to you in 2 to 3 millennia. Give or take a business eon or two. However, if you've enjoyed what you've just heard this evening, then make sure you leave a like on this video and annihilate that subscribe button. Such a small act of obedience is exactly what we need to put the food on the table around here. There's only so many days we can have refried kidney and toe jam hash before I'm absolutely sick of it. Spoiler alert, that ship sailed long ago. Now, I must bid you adieu. I've many things to take care of, and this outro is eating into my day off. Run along now. Have no fear, we'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday to bring you another terrible tale. Go forth, my ghastly gang, and stay spooky.